Hello, guys. This is Kay, and you're listening to another episode of Pod Rainbow Science. And in this episode, we're gonna talk about sex. I hope you're gonna enjoy it. Here we go. Hello, guys. Good to have you back. Once again, thanks for joining me today. And I have to apologize for this 2 week break, but I lost my voice completely and I wasn't able to record anything. Basically, everything I tried to say sounded like skiing on a concrete surface. Like if you ski or snowboard, you know that sound when you slide through the stone or concrete here right beneath the surface of the snow. And if you don't ski, just imagine the sound so unpleasant that you have shivers down your spine. So it was really, really better not to record anything. And the second thing that consumed all my attention was my own personal girlfriend's PhD thesis defense. The first one because she's gonna be a double PhD, and the second one is gonna be probably soon. But this one took a lot of time and a lot of energy to complete it and organize it and all the jazz. But well, at least the one is over, thank goodness. And my thesis defense will be probably soon. So at least I had some training in this matter. And there's also one more issue I want to tackle, and this one is really tough. I mean, this is really hard. Yesterday and today, you might have heard about it. Thousands of protesters marched in many cities in Poland to show support for the family of Isabella. Isabella was a 30-year-old mother and wife who died while being pregnant for the second time. And she died because the doctors waited for too long to terminate her pregnancy because the doctors, they were afraid of breaking law and being accused of murder of an unborn child. Last year, the Constitutional Tribunal of Poland tightened the abortion law, and abortion could be applied in the case of endangerment of the life or health of the mother. In the case of Isabella, her life was endangered, but the doctors were not sure whether they can apply the procedure. So instead, they waited for the fetus to die. And the fetus was certain to die because the water broke in the 22nd week of pregnancy. So there was not a faintest chance to keep the pregnancy. But the doctors chose to wait for the fetus to die, which meant basically to suffocate. And what is crucial in this case is that when the situation like this happens, there is a great risk. There is almost 100% risk for developing sepsis, which is a life-threatening condition. And that happened to Isabella. She suffered terribly for hours before she died, and she was aware that it was too late to do anything. And Isabella died on September 22nd, about 4 in the morning. And she died not because of a medical condition. She died because of the dumb decision someone has made. Because of stupid law implemented a year ago, with a huge crowd protesting against this decision back then, and even greater crowd protesting after the death of Isabella now. And the reason I'm telling you about this is the fact that everywhere in the world, in every country, on every continent, someday someone might come up with such an idea. And if you see that something like this happening, just don't let it happen. Don't let it happen with your tacit approval. Scream as loud as you can before it's too late. And for Isabella, it was too late. But at least I hope that this could be a lesson for all of us. We can now jump to today's episode, and in today's episode I'm gonna talk about sex, because why not? And Well, the truth is that I, along with my fellow coworkers, we're writing the paper about sexual satisfaction among lesbian women. And the data was collected some time ago, but this is a really great data set. Like, my friend was ahead of this data collection process, and he and his co-investigators, they managed to gather data from like roughly 5,000 people, gays, lesbians, bisexual people, and other sexually diverse individuals. And this is really enormous sample compared to others that we have. So the data seems promising, and I hope that this publication is going to be useful for practitioners and for therapists. And in general, the study aimed at exploring what are the correlates of sexual health and sexual satisfaction in LGBT population. And participants answered many questions, really hundreds of questions in the online survey. There were, I don't remember how many exactly, but I believe there were about 300 questions, I guess. I'm not sure. The questions on sexual functioning, sexual health, intimate partnership, intimate relationship problems, frequency of sexual contacts, like number of partners, pregnancies, sexual dysfunctions, and so forth. Many questions, all of which are super useful for us, and I hope other clinical sexologists. And all of them will be published hopefully soon. At least we keep our fingers crossed for them to be published soon. But the first paper is going to be about sexual satisfaction in lesbian and bisexual women, or actually in sexually diverse cisgender women, because there are other than bisexual and gay identifications. And I believe this topic is also a good idea for this episode. I've already published an episode about lesbian bed death, the phenomenon that is believed to exist in long-term same-sex women's relationships. So I'm gonna skip this today. Instead, I'll say something more about the positive aspects of women's sexuality and correlates of sexual satisfaction. And correlates, for those of you who never heard this term, correlates are two things corresponding with each other, or being in a mutual relationship with each other. So, for example, a person's height and weight can be correlates, because when a person is taller than the other one, on average he or she is heavier than the other one. Or the amount of fuel we use is correlated with the distance we've driven, and so on. And sometimes correlations can be funny or even weird. There's even a website, it's called tylervegan.com, with the list and charts presenting the most spurious correlations, like this one between the consumption of mozzarella cheese and civil engineering doctorates awarded. Or the one with the number of people who drowned in a pool and number of movies with Nicolas Cage. And those are, of course, accidental correlations. I don't think that anybody would commit suicide by drowning after watching a movie with Nicolas Cage. But it happened. It's the real correlation. There's no artificial data. And if you want to see more, just go over to this website, tylervegan.com. It's really great. You can browse through very spurious correlations. When it comes to women's sexuality, there are always many misunderstandings on many levels. There are, of course, several sources of such situation. And first and foremost, women's sexuality, thanks to many years of patriarchy, Catholic Church pressure on people, and trailblazing psychotherapists like Freud, who perceived women as just therapy objects. And when you read about early psychologists or the history of psychiatry, or even the history of medicine in general, you'll see that women were only patients. I mean, women were surrounded by dozens of male specialists observing their behavior and symptoms. They were objectified, and nobody, or almost nobody, expected women to have higher needs or deep thoughts on things whatsoever. Therefore, for women, liberation movement meant something more than just fight for the human rights. They were actually fighting for being treated like human beings. So it's no wonder that men were superior to women for many years, and at the time when men received their first medicine for sexual dysfunctions, women had to convince the world that they have sexuality and they have right to sexual pleasure. So it is a huge difference between men and women. And yet another problem with women's sexuality is that you see that in the case of men, it seems to be easier. I mean, the indicator of healthy and happy sexuality in men is erection and ejaculation. And for the vast majority of specialists, it is fairly enough. That, of course, there are more complicated issues in male sexuality, like relations with stress, difficulties in social and intimate relationships, fear of being judged by an intimate partner, or general fear, or anxiety, or depression, and so on. But the bottom line is that in the case of men, sexual functioning can be observed and assessed with standardized methods, like the ability to maintain erection, ability to ejaculate, or other measures. And contrary, in the case of women, the objective assessment becomes tough and almost impossible without the special equipment. That's why researchers who obviously don't like to complicate their lives too much conducted research mostly in the samples of men. And additionally, women in same-sex couples or in same-sex relationships were neglected due to their relationship type. So the majority of research was conducted on heterosexual couples, same-sex couples, lesbians, or gays were the subject to research interest only, if ever, but only in terms of HIV or other sexually transmitted infections. And another problem comes directly from the gender bias and society, which is accepting toward male sexuality and men's sexual expression relevantly more than it is toward women's sexuality. So you see there was a long way to go for women's, especially minority women's sexuality, to be researched and addressed. And when finally sexual minority women got their chance to be researched, the greatest interest was put on their relationship struggles, their issues with attachment to a partner, or worries or even grief over not having a chance to have children with the partner, or something like this. So only problems were in the middle of the investigations. However, there were several scholars who dedicated their time limitedly to sexual satisfaction of women or sexual minority persons in general. And for instance, William Masters and Virginia Johnson, if you know the series entitled Master of Sex, you know what I'm talking about. They analyzed differences between sexual contacts between straight and same-sex couples. And what they found was that the sexual intercourse in same-sex couples is deliberately slower in both men's and women's relationships. And they kind of celebrate the contact with each other, and the quality of their sex, or in general the quality of sex life, is better than goal-oriented and performance-oriented sex in straight couples. Masters and Johnson, they even made a statement that straight couples should learn from same-sex couples how to relate to each other sexually, and consequently they employed this finding in their therapies with couples. So they were pretty successful with this. And in general, women, and we know it from the research conducted in recent years, we know it that in general, women in same-sex relationships and women who have sex with women self-rate their sexual satisfaction higher compared to straight women. They are also considered to be more sexually responsive, so that they can adjust to a partner more easily than women who have sex with men. And there are several explanations, but the one that appeals to me the most is the one that women are familiar with their own bodies. So that seems to be easier to have contact with someone who has more or less the same body than with someone completely different like men. And also there are other hypotheses explaining this discrepancy, like for instance the psychological one, that women are more likely to talk and discuss things, so they are more likely to talk about their needs and preferences. Or the biological explanation, which points up slower sex intercourse and therefore greater tension that builds up, and the satisfaction is also greater. And there are, of course, a few other explanations, but all of them to date are equally reasonable. But the question that needs to be addressed the question that makes many researchers toss and turn during nights is the question: what makes sex better? Or to be more scientific, what are the predictors of sexual satisfaction in women who have sex with women? Many of those predictors are common for all women, regardless of their sexual identity or relationship status, although there are a few specific to the sample of sexual minority women. So I'm going to start with those considered as the most important factors, that is, those which have the greatest impact on all women's sexual satisfaction. Something that is inevitably related to sexual satisfaction is an overall health of women and men. And what is directly related to our health is our physical activity or physical inactivity. And not only through its influence on body image, because obviously research showed that our body, or actually not the body itself, but the discrepancy between the way we perceive our body and the way we want it to look like, this discrepancy is related to the sexual satisfaction. And if the discrepancy is small, it doesn't affect our sexual satisfaction that much, regardless of our body weight or shape. And if the discrepancy is high, our sexual satisfaction is poor, regardless of that if you're plus size model or Victoria's Secret model. It just doesn't matter. But the physical activity has a more profound relationship with sexual satisfaction and sexual activity in general. And people who engage in physical activity on a regular basis, and I mean really regular basis, not regular once every 4 months, those people reported greater sexual performance and greater sexual desirability. And also people who had less physical activity in a few months preceding the research reported decrease in sexual satisfaction and rated their sexual functioning as less sufficient than before. And physical activity, and what's important, it doesn't really matter what kind of activity it was, whether it was Pilates or yoga or aerobic or resistance training. All kind of physical activity decreased the level of blood serotonin, which is related to depressive symptoms, and that kind of automatically caused improvement in self-rated sexual satisfaction. And I don't want to talk too much about technical issues related to physical activity, so I'm going to skip all those processes that are going on in muscles and tissues after workout. But the greatest merit I should mention is hormonal balance. Physical activity helps to keep our hormones in balance, and because of that, our general self-rated health is also high. Sex drive goes up, our endurance and stamina is also greater, and consequently, sex performance is better, and we're just more effective when it comes to sex life. And this relationship is universal for all people. There's no difference between gays, lesbians, bisexual people, straight people, pansexual people, transgender people. It just doesn't matter. On average, regular physical activity, for instance, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, even the most basic activities such as everyday walk or yoga or swimming, after some time, it usually takes 3 or 4 weeks to see the effect. On average, it has positive effect on quality of sex life. There are, of course, situations when this relationship is more complicated. For instance, when we have medical condition that can decrease our sex life quality. When we experience a lot of stress, which causes serious hormonal imbalance. Or we have depression, and physical activity, even the most intense, wouldn't help us. But on average, physical activity can improve our sex life. Another interesting factor that influences sexual satisfaction in women is a factor specific to same-sex couples, which is identity pride. And some researchers admit that Shame and pride are both emotions which rise from viewing oneself from the position of other person. As you can imagine, shame is present when you feel that other people see you in a negative way or perceive you as someone inferior to them. And on the contrary, pride is present when you feel positively evaluated by other people. It is quite obvious that LGBTQ people and women, especially, feel that they are perceived by other rather in a negative than in a positive way. And I'm saying especially women because women often experience something what is called double stigma, understood in the framework of intersectionality. And intersectionality is a framework which helps to understand how persons' features such as race, gender, sexual identity, and so on, how they interact with each other and impact on the dynamics of discrimination process. So if you think of women, you can imagine that sexual minority women experience discrimination because of their sexual identity, but also because of their gender. While, for instance, sexual minority men experience discrimination only because of their sexual identity. So this is basically how intersectionality works. You can imagine that sexual minority people who are whose skin color is other than white, they can experience discrimination because of sexual identity and because of racial bias. So the perfect situation is when we have high level of pride and low level of shame. So we want to be proud gays, proud lesbians, proud bisexual ones, and so on. And we want to be able to say explicitly about our same-sex partners without thinking about whether the person we are speaking to accepts it or not. Without thinking whether our boss or co-worker is okay with LGBTQ people or not. And every time when we must hesitate over revealing our identity, we experience more or less intense feeling of shame. And what's interesting, those feelings are not situational. And by saying not situational, I mean they are intense and they are felt in those situations, but they have an impact on our lives constantly, all the time. For instance, via anticipated discrimination. And when it comes to sex, having sex is quite visible and clearly related to our partner's gender and our sexual identity. Therefore, sexual intercourse may increase the feeling of shame and remind us very vividly about being gay or lesbian or transgender person. And when we have a deep conviction that being gay is bad and shameful, and this conviction is rooted deeply in our cognitive picture of ourselves. Subsequently, this feeling kind of automatically starts the whole cascade of negative thoughts and feelings about ourselves. They don't even have to be realized, so they don't have to be realized to have an impact on our behavior and or our well-being. You can compare it to the situation when you call someone and this person doesn't pick up the phone for a long time, and you call him once, you call him second time, third time, 12th time. You usually don't think that they forgot to turn on the sound, but you think that something terrible has happened, and this person for sure is in a hospital right now, while in the vast majority of cases it is not true. And when you look at the sexual intercourse, there are several factors that influence on our level of satisfaction. It can be relationship quality, our partner's ability to keep up with our needs, our and partner's sexual responsiveness. It can also be cognitive aspects, such as our ability to concentrate on our sex life. So if we think about what we have to do tomorrow, or if the boss would be happy about the work we've done, the sex wouldn't be very satisfying. If we think of pride and identity, or our acceptance of sexual identity, or unacceptance of our sexual identity, it works like a toxic piece of our recognition. This shame sits somewhere in the back of our mind, and it's limiting our ability to be able to make the most of our lives. And this is like a neon light which remains off for a long time, and just from time to time it glares, reminding us that, hey, buddy, you're gay. You're worse than they are, those straight people. Don't be too happy. Don't be too cheerful. You're always inferior to straight people. So I believe the way to happiness, or at least the road to sexual satisfaction in LGBTQ people, is just the road from shame to pride. So the moment you transform from worrying whether people would accept you or not to thinking whether you accept them or not would be the moment of freedom and liberation. And I guess this is what all LGBTQ people should experience in their life. And I believe, to be honest, my job and all mental health specialist job is to make it happen sooner for every LGBTQ individual. Another predictor that struck me as quite important is relationship quality. Women on average have in general good relationships, and I know of course many women who had pretty bad experience when it comes to same-sex relationships, but at least research shows that on average women in same-sex relationships seem to be more satisfied compared to those in heterosexual couples. And McNulty, for instance, conducted longitudinal research on relationship satisfaction and sexual satisfaction, and he measured relationship and sexual satisfaction 8 times, every 6 up to every 8 months. The sample mean age was 25 years, and overall they measured somewhat over 200 newly married couples. And McNulty showed that marriage satisfaction or relationship satisfaction predicted the level of sexual satisfaction. And obviously, those measures were positively related. But the question is how we can improve those things that seem to be related to sexual satisfaction. In the case of physical activity, the answer is pretty simple. We should be more active. Go to the gym, go to the yoga center, or instead of spending hours in front of Netflix, go for a half an hour walk or ride a bike or something, whatever. Just be active and pick the activity you really like, not the one which is popular or the one your friends are up to. It should be a pleasure for you and definitely not something you hate, and definitely not something you feel forced to do. But the relationship quality and pride identity are not so easy to increase, and I don't really have any golden advice for you. However, I found a few tips in research which I think that are worth noting here. So the first one is to build pride identity and combat internalized homophobia and other negative effects of stigma, is finding a group of LGBTQ people with whom you really, really relate. It doesn't have to be a lot of people. In this case, quality is more important than quantity, and it's crucial to have other LGBTQ people around you, because oftentimes, even when you have supportive straight friends and family, when you don't have LGBTQ friends, you can feel like the only gay in the village. So just to combat this feeling of loneliness and isolation, we need other people like us who share our feelings, fears, anxieties, and who can understand us really well. And another piece of advice, and this is really good, I practice it myself, is cut short all the social media that provide negative news about LGBTQ issues. All those news about prejudice toward LGBTQ people, another person who got beaten, another person who was bullied, it all drags you down. I mean, to be honest, you can't do much about it. And I'm not saying, of course, to turn a blind eye to social inequality, but being bombed with news every day only make you feel worse. So if you can, just stop following those profiles which are constantly posting about bad things that happen to LGBT persons, because it's good for your mental health and for my mental health. I did it and I feel really, really relieved. And my final advice when it comes to mental health quality and well-being is just don't hang around toxic individuals. If you feel that someone abuses you, or if you feel tired or irritated after speaking to someone, just don't do it. If you feel that something is not okay in your relationship with a person, it means that it's not good for you. Just listen to your intuition. There are plenty of people out there. You're really worth a lot more than you think, so don't waste your time and energy for those people who don't appreciate it. In the case of relationship quality, the thing becomes a little more complicated because there are two of you, or sometimes even more than two. But in vast majority of cases, there are two people. But the general tip I can give you, and this factor is according to research the most important predictor in women's relationship quality, is commitment. Or actually, there are two things: commitment and trust. They are interchangeable. Of course, easier said than done, but commitment is something that you can work on. And the thing to start definitely is having time for each other. We're all busy right now. We often don't have time to eat together. Even when we spend time together, each of us is thinking either about the backlog we have, or work to do, or problems we have, and so on. So my pro tip to make your relationship better is have a golden hour. And it doesn't have to be an hour, literally. It can be 20 or 40 minutes. But have time only for each other. To listen to each other or just to be with each other, it really helps. And it really, really can improve your communication and relationship quality a lot. This is not going to be easy in the beginning, because focusing on each other and keeping your attention in general is not easy, because we all have 100 thoughts on many things. But keep trying, and you'll see that time after time it's gonna be easier. Just remember that regularity is the key to success, no matter whether it's sport, learning language, writing a book, or anything else. Just be regular, practice, and I hope you're gonna do fine. I hope this is gonna be helpful for you, and I guess that's just all I wanted to tell you today. I hope to see you in a week, because my voice it's stable. It's not very well, but it's stable. Have a great day. Have a great week. Take care, of course. And by the way, if you like what I do, you can now click on the link in the description and buy me a coffee. Thank you. And take care. Bye.